felt it, the shift, the sudden coldness, the unexplained tension, the way the room changed when you walked in, and you asked yourself, what did I do? Listen carefully. You did not do anything wrong. You remembered who you are. You are not ordinary. You never have been. And the moment you started awakening, the atmosphere around you reacted. Chosen one, this message found you because your spirit has been wrestling with confusion. You sensed hostility rising without warning. Friendships turned strange. Family grew distant. Colleagues became competitive. It felt targeted, personal, sharp. But what if it wasn't random? What if it was confirmation? There are 9 signs their hostility is actually God reclaiming your stolen spiritual authority. 9 confirmations, 9 awakenings, 9 pieces of a pattern only the chosen can recognize. Not everyone will understand this. Only those marked for destiny feel this kind of warfare. If this resonates already, you know this space is different. You know this message carries weight. Stand firm, lean in, and prepare yourself. Because this is not rejection, this is restoration. First, the hostility began the moment you started remembering who you are. Think about it. Before your awakening, things were calmer. You were agreeable. You were quieter. You doubted yourself. You dimmed your light to keep peace, and they were comfortable with that. But then something shifted inside you. You began trusting your intuition. You began setting boundaries. You began speaking with clarity instead of fear. And suddenly, their energy changed. Why? Because your awakening disrupted a system that depended on your silence. You see, when you were unsure, they felt secure. When you questioned yourself, they felt powerful. When you shrank, they expanded. But the moment you stood up internally, the balance shifted. Light entered the room, and light exposes what darkness prefers hidden. You did not attack them. You illuminated the dynamic, and that illumination made them uncomfortable. Psychologically, when someone reclaims confidence, those who benefited from their insecurity feel threatened. Spiritually, when authority returns to its rightful vessel, the enemy stirs agitation through those nearby. That is not coincidence. That is warfare. Their hostility is not about your personality. It is about your positioning. You stepped into awareness, and awareness is dangerous to systems built on control. Have you noticed the stronger your voice became, the sharper their tone became? The clearer your boundaries became, the more aggressive their pushback became. This is not random conflict. This is resistance to your restoration. You were never meant to stay small. You were never meant to stay uncertain. You were never meant to stay spiritually muted. You were meant to lead. And leadership begins with self-recognition. The moment you remembered who you were, the spiritual atmosphere recalibrated. That recalibration feels like hostility, but it is actually divine reclamation. God is retrieving what was slowly drained from you: confidence, discernment, authority, presence. And when authority rises, those who once benefited from your doubt will react. Do not shrink again. Do not apologize for awakening. Do not mistake resistance for failure. This is confirmation. And if the hostility intensified when your awareness sharpened, wait until you understand what the second sign reveals. Second, they attack your confidence because your authority is resurfacing. Pay attention. When they speak, they do not correct your behavior. They question your identity. They do not say, "You made a mistake." They say, "Who do you think you are?" Feel that. The attack is not about what you did. It is about who you are becoming. Chosen one, have you noticed, the more secure you felt inside, the more they tried to shake you. The moment you stopped apologizing for your presence, their tone sharpened. The moment you spoke with calm certainty, they called you arrogant. The moment you carried yourself with quiet strength, they labeled you difficult. Why? Because leadership is returning to your spirit, and they can feel it. You do not have to announce authority. Authority announces itself. It is in your posture, your silence, your discernment, your refusal to over-explain. That presence unsettles people who once relied on your self-doubt. Before they could steer you with subtle criticism, before they could plant seeds of insecurity, before they could control outcomes by making you question yourself. But now that door is closed, and they know it. Psychologically, when someone loses access to controlling you, they escalate. Spiritually, when the enemy loses leverage, he increases volume. That is what you are witnessing. Their words are weapons aimed at your confidence. Because confidence is the throne of authority. If they can make you doubt yourself, they can delay your assignment. If they can make you shrink, they can slow your rise. But listen carefully. The very fact that your confidence is being targeted proves it is powerful. Darkness does not attack weakness, it attacks emerging strength. You are not being criticized because you are failing. You are being confronted because you are advancing. Let that settle. You feel the warfare because favor is increasing. You feel resistance because authority is stabilizing. You feel pressure because power is consolidating. This is not personality conflict. This is spiritual transition. They sense leadership returning to you. They sense that you no longer need their validation. They sense that your internal compass is stronger than their external opinions, and that terrifies those who benefited from your confusion. But you must not retreat, stand firm. When they question you, do not over-defend. When they mock you, do not overreact. When they provoke you, do not descend. Authority does not beg for permission. You are reclaiming spiritual ground. Ground that was once eroded by doubt. Ground that was once surrendered through fear, and now it is coming back. Their intimidation is not dominance, it is desperation. They are losing spiritual leverage, and they can feel it slipping. You are not the insecure version of yourself anymore. You are not the hesitant one. You are not the easily manipulated soul they once knew. You are remembering, and remembrance is dangerous. Hold your ground, guard your mind, protect your confidence like sacred territory. Because this battle over your identity is proof that your authority is alive. And if this level of attack is already surfacing, wait until you understand what the third sign exposes. Third, the warfare intensified when you stopped seeking their approval. This is where everything shifted. As long as you needed validation, they felt secure. As long as you waited for permission, they felt powerful. As long as you adjusted yourself to stay accepted, they felt in control. But something broke inside you. You grew tired of performing. You grew tired of explaining. You grew tired of shrinking your truth just to keep the peace. And you quietly detached. Not loudly, not rebelliously, just internally. You stopped chasing applause. You stopped needing agreement. You stopped bending to be liked. And that is when the hostility sharpened. Have you noticed when you were trying to please them, they tolerated you? When you stopped trying, they turned against you. Why? Because your detachment removed their emotional control. Approval is currency in weak systems. And you stop trading. You see, when you crave acceptance, people can guide you with reward and punishment. They can lift you up with praise. They can crush you with withdrawal. But when you no longer need their approval, their leverage collapses. And that collapse feels like threat. Spiritually, approval addiction keeps authority dormant. It keeps you dependent. It keeps you manageable. It keeps you quiet. But authority awakens when approval dies. When you stop seeking their validation, you stepped into spiritual independence. That independence is dangerous. Darkness cannot manipulate what it cannot emotionally hook. The enemy cannot steer what is no longer desperate for applause. And they can feel that shift. You no longer over-explain yourself. You no longer chase reconciliation at any cost. You no longer sacrifice your discernment to keep relationships intact. You became anchored, and anchored people cannot be steered. That is why the backlash feels personal. That is why the tension feels intense. That is why the rejection feels sharper than before. It is not because you became worse, it is because you became free. Freedom disrupts control. Freedom exposes manipulation. Freedom ends silent agreements you never consciously signed. You broke a pattern. You stopped feeding a system that fed on your insecurity. And now the system is reacting. This is not social conflict. This is spiritual backlash. When manipulation fails, it turns to hostility. When control dissolves, it escalates. When emotional strings are cut, noise increases. But listen carefully. You are not losing connection. You are losing chains. You are not being isolated. You are being fortified. Chosen one, you were never designed to be driven by approval. You were designed to be led by assignment. Assignment is heavier than applause. Calling is stronger than consensus. Anointing outweighs popularity, and when you chose calling over comfort, warfare intensified. That is confirmation. You are not unstable. You are unhooked. Stand firm. Do not return to begging for acceptance. Do not apologize for boundaries. Do not trade your authority for temporary peace. Because what broke was not relationship. What broke was control. And if detachment caused this level of reaction, wait until you see what the fourth sign uncovers. Fourth, they try to rewrite your story because your narrative carries power. Look closely. When hostility could not shake your confidence, when intimidation could not steal your peace, they shifted tactics. Now they question your history. They twist conversations. They distort intentions. They retell events with you cast as the villain. Have you noticed suddenly you are too much? Suddenly you are the problem. Suddenly stories about you circulate that do not match your heart. That is not random. That is strategic. False accusations increase when destiny gets closer. Because your story is not just memory. Your story is authority. Your story is evidence. Your story is oil. If they can distort your image, they believe they can delay your rise. This is ancient warfare. When a chosen vessel begins to stand, darkness attacks reputation. When leadership emerges, smear campaigns surface. When anointing increases, whispers multiply. Why? Because perception influences positioning. If they can make others doubt you, they think they can isolate you. If they can stain your name, they think they can stall your assignment. But hear this clearly. Your truth carries weight, and weight cannot be erased by noise. They are not rewriting your story because it is weak. They are rewriting it because it is powerful. There is something about your journey that threatens their illusion of control. Your survival exposes their manipulation. Your growth exposes their insecurity. Your healing exposes their dysfunction. And they cannot control a narrative that reveals their shadow. So they attempt distortion. This is not about gossip. This is spiritual sabotage. Darkness knows that identity is tied to narrative. If you begin to question your own story, you begin to question your authority. That is the goal. Confusion, self-doubt, second-guessing. But you must not participate. Stand in your truth. Even if your voice shakes, even if your name is misrepresented, even if the crowd listens to lies. You know what happened. God knows what happened. Heaven recorded what happened, and heaven outranks opinion. Chosen one understand this. When they escalate to attacking your reputation, it means your rise is visible. They would not invest energy in distortion if your impact was small. You are not being misrepresented because you are insignificant. You are being targeted because you are influential. Your narrative carries power. Power to inspire, power to lead, power to break cycles, and cycles break violently. Do not shrink your story to make others comfortable. Do not silence your testimony to avoid tension. Do not edit your truth to protect fragile egos. Your life is not a rumor. It is a record of divine preservation, and no smear can erase what God established. Let them talk. Let them twist. Let them whisper. Truth does not panic. Truth stands. And if the battle has now moved to your name, prepare yourself. Because the fifth sign will reveal why isolation is not rejection. Fifth, isolation surrounded you before elevation began forming. This one hurt. You were not just criticized. You were cut off. Conversations slowed. Invitations stopped. Support faded. You felt pushed to the margins, misunderstood, misread, misrepresented. And you asked yourself, why does it feel like I'm walking alone? Listen carefully. You were not being abandoned. You were being separated. There is a difference. Abandonment is neglect. Separation is strategy. God will isolate what He is preparing to elevate, because elevation requires strength, and strength is forged in solitude. When you were surrounded by noise, you depended on feedback. When you were surrounded by opinions, you measured yourself through approval. When you were surrounded by constant connection, you did not have to fully hear your own spirit. But isolation stripped that. It removed the distractions, it removed the applause, it removed the interference. And suddenly you had to face yourself, your thoughts, your fears, your insecurities. It was uncomfortable, but it was necessary, because authority cannot be built in crowds. Authority is built in caves. Isolation stripped dependency. It burned away the need to be understood. It burned away the need to be constantly affirmed. It forced you to anchor internally, and something powerful began forming. You started hearing your intuition clearly. You started discerning patterns faster. You started feeling less shaken by external noise. Why? Because when people left, God remained. When voices faded, clarity grew. When doors closed, identity solidified. What felt like rejection was refinement. What felt like loneliness was leadership training. Darkness thought isolation would weaken you, but it strengthened you. The enemy hoped you would crumble in silence. Instead, you sharpened. You learned to sit with discomfort. You learned to trust your discernment. You learned to rely on divine guidance instead of human reassurance. That is power. Chosen one. You are not just surviving separation. You are being fortified by it. Isolation was not punishment, it was preparation. Preparation for rooms that require stability. Preparation for influence that requires discipline. Preparation for authority that cannot be emotionally swayed. If they had stayed close, you might have stayed dependent. If they had continued affirming you, you might have avoided growth. If comfort had remained, authority would have stayed dormant. So heaven allowed distance, not to break you, to build you. You are not smaller because you walk alone. You are stronger, and strength attracts elevation. You are becoming internally unshakable, emotionally disciplined, spiritually anchored. That is why the hostility feels sharper now, because you no longer need them. Isolation has done its work. You are no longer seeking inclusion. You are preparing for impact. And if separation has already forged this much authority inside you, wait until you see what the sixth sign reveals. Sixth, their envy reveals the anointing they cannot access. This is where it becomes undeniable. You feel it in the room, the tension, the comparison, the subtle competition that you never initiated. You did not declare yourself superior. You did not try to outshine anyone. You simply stood in your presence, and that presence unsettled them. Why? Because envy does not rise around emptiness. Envy rises around visible favor. They compete with what they secretly recognize. They see something on you, something they cannot manufacture, something they cannot imitate, something they cannot earn through performance. It is anointing, and anointing cannot be copied. Have you noticed how your calm agitates them? How your silence irritates them? How your steady confidence provokes them? You are not loud. You are not forceful. You are not aggressive. You are grounded. And grounded people trigger unstable spirits. Your peace exposes their chaos. Your clarity exposes their confusion. Your discipline exposes their lack of alignment. You do not have to boast. Your fruit speaks. And that fruit confronts what they have not cultivated. This is not about jealousy over possessions. This is deeper. It is envy over positioning. They sense that doors open for you differently. They sense that opportunities align around you. They sense that even in warfare you are preserved, that preservation unsettles them. Because favor reveals difference, and difference reveals calling. You were not meant to blend in. You were marked to stand out, not for ego, for assignment. The favor over your life exposes the absence in theirs, not because they are worthless, but because they are not walking your path. And instead of seeking their own alignment, they measure themselves against your grace. That comparison turns into hostility. Understand this clearly. Envy is the shadow cast by visible destiny. If destiny was not present, there would be no shadow. If calling was not evident, there would be no agitation. You are not being resented because you are arrogant. You are being resented because you are appointed. Darkness cannot replicate what heaven assigns. So it attempts to compete. It attempts to discredit. It attempts to provoke insecurity inside you. Do not receive it. You are not responsible for managing their envy. You are responsible for stewarding your anointing. Stand steady. Do not shrink to ease their discomfort. Do not dim to quiet their insecurity. Do not apologize for favor. Favor is not pride. Favor is purpose. And when you carry purpose, those without direction feel exposed. You are spiritually protected. You are spiritually positioned. You are spiritually distinct. That distinction is not arrogance. It is alignment. And the more you accept it, the more visible it becomes, which means the tension may increase, but so will your authority. Because what they envy today, they will eventually recognize as leadership. And if envy has already surfaced this strongly, wait until you understand what the seventh sign uncovers. 7. They attempt to provoke you because they fear your restraint. Watch this carefully. The hostility changes tone. It becomes bait, subtle jabs, public challenges, disrespect disguised as humor. They push, they poke, they test your reactions. Why? Because they want you reactive, not sovereign. They want emotion, not elevation. Have you noticed? When you stay calm, they escalate. When you stay silent, they grow louder. When you refuse to argue, they become more aggressive. That is not coincidence. Your silence unsettles them more than your anger ever could. Anger they can manage. Outbursts they can justify. Emotional reactions they can label unstable. But composure exposes insecurity. When you refuse to descend, you reveal discipline. When you refuse to match their chaos, you reveal control. When you refuse to be triggered, you reveal throne-level stability. And that terrifies them. Authority operates in control. Not noise, not panic, not emotional spirals. Control. You have changed. There was a time when you would have reacted. A time when you would have defended yourself immediately. A time when you would have matched tone for tone. But now you pause. You observe. You choose. That pause is power. Spiritually, provocation is a tactic. If darkness can pull you into emotional chaos, it can blur your discernment. If it can drag you into petty battles, it can distract you from assignment. But you are no longer easily pulled. You have learned restraint. And restraint is not weakness, it is weaponry. They mistake your calm for passivity. They mistake your silence for surrender. They mistake your patience for fear. They are wrong. You are not suppressing power. You are governing it. There is a difference. Governed power is dangerous. Ungoverned power is chaotic. And chaos is easier to discredit. They want you chaotic because chaos can be dismissed. But sovereignty commands space without demanding it. Every time you refuse to descend, your throne solidifies. Yes, your throne. Because leadership is not about dominance, it is about control of self. You control your tongue, you control your emotions, you control your responses, and that self-governance signals readiness. You are no longer easily manipulated. You are no longer baited by immaturity. You are no longer emotionally entangled in small battles. You are operating from altitude, and altitude changes perspective. From above, petty attacks look small. From above, noise loses impact. From above, clarity strengthens. That elevation makes you harder to control, which means they try harder. But listen carefully. Restraint is proof that authority has matured inside you. You are not here to argue, you are here to reign. And every time you choose dignity over drama discipline, over impulse silence, over chaos, you confirm your rise. They fear your restraint because it reveals you cannot be destabilized. And if your composure is already shaking their ground, wait until you understand what the 8th sign exposes. 8th, doors begin closing violently before greater dominion opens. This is where it feels brutal. Not subtle distance, not mild tension, violent closure. Opportunities disappear, connections sever overnight, access denied without explanation. And you stand there thinking, why is everything collapsing at once? Listen carefully. Rejection accelerates when transition is near. When you are about to shift levels, old structures cannot hold you. Old alliances cannot contain you. Old environments cannot steward what you are becoming. So they shut down, not gently, forcefully, because your authority cannot coexist with past containment. You are stretching beyond the room, beyond the role, beyond the limitations that once defined you, and the system felt it. Have you noticed how quickly doors slammed once your clarity sharpened? How suddenly people withdrew once your standards rose? How aggressively certain spaces pushed you out once you stopped shrinking? That is not loss. That is eviction from confinement. You are not being rejected from destiny. You are being removed from restriction. What is being taken away was never meant to carry your rise. It was temporary, training ground, holding space. But dominion cannot emerge in borrowed rooms. So heaven begins reclaiming territory through you. And reclamation shakes foundations. This shaking feels chaotic. It feels unfair. It feels destabilizing. But it is structural. Old frameworks are cracking. Old permissions are expiring. Old ceilings are breaking. Because you outgrew them. Darkness wants you to interpret closure as failure. It whispers, see you lost. See you were not ready. See you miscalculated. But look deeper. Every door that closed recently was connected to who you were not, who you are becoming. Every alliance that dissolved was attached to a smaller version of you. Every opportunity that evaporated was tied to an outdated identity. You are not shrinking, you are shedding. And shedding is uncomfortable. It looks like loss before it looks like liberation. But this is dominion forming. Dominion requires space. Dominion requires authority. Dominion requires a foundation not built on dependency. You cannot rule in rooms designed to contain you, so they collapse. Let them. Do not chase what closed. Do not beg for what rejected you. Do not attempt to rebuild what heaven dismantled. Stand still. Feel the ground shifting. Because when heaven reclaims territory through you, it does not negotiate with old structures. It replaces them. You are not losing ground. You are being repositioned on higher ground. And higher ground demands separation from lower ceilings. The shaking is intense because the rise is significant. The closure is loud because the opening will be undeniable. You are on the edge of dominion, and if the doors have begun closing, this forcefully brace yourself. Because the ninth sign will reveal why the final wave of hostility is not resistance. It is transfer. Ninth, their hostility peaks because the transfer of spiritual authority is complete. This is the surge before surrender. Feel it. The pressure intensifies. The resistance sharpens. The opposition becomes louder than ever before. Why now? Because you are no longer fighting for authority. You carry it. There was a time when you were striving, praying for strength, hoping for validation, trying to prove your worth. That season is over. Now you walk into rooms and the atmosphere shifts. Now you speak and people feel weight. Now you stand and unseen forces adjust. You are not trying to access power. Power has settled on you, and darkness knows it. That is why hostility peaks. That is why agitation spikes. That is why opposition feels frantic. This is not casual resistance. This is thrashing. When a transfer is complete, the former holder panics. What was stolen through manipulation, through fear, through spiritual sabotage, is being restored with force. Authority that was drained from you is returning. Confidence that was chipped away is fortified. Voice that was silenced is amplified. You are not surviving anymore. You are reigning. The same voices that opposed you will soon answer to your leadership. Not because you seek revenge, but because alignment demands order. When heaven installs authority, it does not consult insecurity. It establishes dominion. You feel different now, steadier, heavier, untouchable in a way you cannot fully explain. That is coronation energy, and darkness always thrashes before it bows. Understand this. The peak of hostility is proof that the transfer is irreversible. If you were still weak, they would ignore you. If you were still doubting, they would remain calm. If you were still contained, they would feel secure. But you are not. You are fully awakened, spiritually untouchable, divinely assigned, set apart beyond reversal. This is not ego. This is confirmation. You were chosen. Before the rejection, before the isolation, before the smear, before the closed doors. Every attack was preparation. Every betrayal was refinement. Every moment of loneliness was fortification. Nothing was wasted. You are chosen, not random, not accidental, not overlooked. Chosen. Stand in that. Let hostility confirm you. Let warfare refine you. Let pressure strengthen you. Do not flinch. Do not retreat. Do not question the process now. The transfer is complete. Comment 9 below if you feel the authority settling on you. Seal it. Declare it. Subscribe if you know you are walking through divine reclamation. There is more unfolding, and you are not alone in this rise. You were never ordinary. You were never forgotten. You were being prepared. And now you are positioned, chosen, protected, crowned, and nothing formed against you will stand.